The one thing I would say is, whatever happens here on November the 8th, American politics is never going to be the same again.
Thank you for joining us, Mr. Farag. Now, Americans have seen a lot of clips. We know what an effective speaker you are. We know what a fearless speaker you are, going right to the seat of power and taking them on, speaking truth to them. I want to ask you what Donald Trump needs to do in this final debate tonight. But before we do, real quickly, we've seen a lot of revelations from Hillary Clinton talking to various people, the real Hillary Clinton. One of the things she tells the bankers is that she dreams of a hemispheric common market with no borders and with hemispheric control of our economy. That's what she's dreaming of. That's our nightmare. How is her dream of a hemispheric union like the European Union that you have warned people about?
Well, in a sense, I think we can answer that question and your later question about what Donald Trump should do later. We'll do it all at once, because I think actually WikiLeaks telling us what she was saying, being paid a fortune to speak to Wall Street investment banks and companies, I think what she said there was the truth. She was vehemently opposed, as was Obama, to Britain voting for Brexit. And in many ways, Brexit wasn't just about the United Kingdom and our relationship with the European Union. It was about the whole of our Western world, of our democratic systems, of whether we're to be independent sovereign nation states that vote for our own governments, make our own laws, control our own borders, or whether we're to throw all of that away for some sort of higher order. Now, I've spent a quarter of a century fighting the European Union. It was sold to the people as, it'll be very good for jobs and good for trade and good for investment. And when the cat sort of got out of the bag and people realized it was loss of control, we were told, it's okay. It's just pooling sovereignty. That's the kind of language they use. So I thought it was very interesting that Obama came to Britain and told us not to vote for Brexit, that after I came to America a couple of months ago and spoke at a Trump rally about Brexit and what I thought the implications might be for the US elections, Hillary attacked me personally. And I think at the heart of this, look, we've got two candidates here, right, standing for president. I think we could say, honestly, they're both imperfect. Mind you, do you know what? We're all human beings. We're all imperfect. But the real point here is, what is the big vision? And Hillary is completely tied into this big business, big bank, globalist agenda that effectively wants to take away the ability of the nation state to be the master of its own destiny. And one of the reasons I was really keen to come back today was to talk about this stuff and to warn Americans that actually, if this woman becomes president, piece by piece, she will drag you into something, if she possibly can, that will take away your democratic rights, take away the ability to control your borders, and make you less safe in an age of international terrorism.
I think Hillary was telling the globalists that she's on the same page with them. She understands that first you have to have an economic union, and then it's going to progress to a political union. And we saw that with the EU as well, didn't we? We have this hemispheric union that's economic. Then as things start to deteriorate, perhaps by design, then they consolidate that into a globalist union. So we see the progression from hemisphere to global with all of these agreements, and a progression from economic to political union.
Right back to the early 1950s, the architects of the European Union, Jean Monnet, a French academic, and he's writing in 1951-52 that we will take the peoples of Europe towards a political union using economic arguments. Basically, we're going to lie to you. I mean, that's what they were saying. And I believe that Hillary is of that mold.
And I think the key thing is that the U.S. is at the center of this, aren't they? We have seen consolidation with Europe, with the European Union, and of course what Hillary is talking about is a North American Union. But now we've got the next step towards globalism, the transatlantic, the trans-Pacific partnerships. That's where they create the economic consolidation. And that's going to be the precedent to a political global governance. Now, I think that Donald Trump is the only chance we've got of throwing a monkey wrench into the system, don't you? Or as you would say, a spanner.
Yeah, a spanner. Yeah, no, I mean, look, Clinton represents continuity. She represents the kind of politics that the Western world, because let's face it, where America goes, we tend to follow. I'm just hoping that for once you follow us in terms of the Brexit vote. But no, I think that she represents this direction of government that has become completely detached from the hopes and aspirations of ordinary people, has led us into an endless series of foreign wars, and I mean Libya being the last example.
Is the world a safer place with the President Hillary Clinton? And we've seen her set the Middle East on fire, first in Libya, then in Syria. We've seen her Russian reset, essentially a reset of the Cold War and perhaps a hot war that she's implying.
It's the old thing, isn't it? It's tactics and strategy. You know, your short-term military tactics can be right in terms of you set out to depose an Arab nationalist leader, but where was the strategy? Where was the long-term goal? You know, what were we seeking to leave behind us? And we seem to have this deluded idea that somehow these Arab states are all going to become democracies in exactly the same way that we are. Well, they've never been that. They've never shown any desire, frankly, to be that. And I think Trump should talk about Libya a bit more. And I think he should talk a little bit more about Iraq. I think he should talk a bit more about the fact that she is part of a political cabal that led to a gap in the market that ISIS are doing their very best to fill. And I think he's got to focus on that. Because I'm very struck, you know, when these debates get very personal and very dirty, when it gets dragged into the mud, and I mean, let's face it, the first 20 minutes of the St. Louis debate, but I was watching it like this. I mean, it was difficult, you know, it was so awful. It was difficult to believe what was being said and what was going on. But as soon as Trump is able to pivot away from that stuff and to talk policy and to talk big picture and to talk about what is America's place in the world, when he starts doing that, he starts winning.
Let's talk a little bit about the establishment's tactics right now. They're telling us that he doesn't have a chance. Trump doesn't have a chance based on what they tell us the polls are saying. But they told you the same thing in Brexit up to the day of the election, didn't they?
Well, in fact, there was an opinion poll that came out at 10:30 on the morning of the Brexit referendum that put the Remain camp 10 points in the lead.
The day of.
The day of.
Day of.
Yep, amazing. 10 points in the lead. So, you know, we were all told you haven't got a chance. And of course, part of that is to demotivate the voters that think, hey, do you know what? We haven't voted for 20 years, but maybe if we go down to the polling station today, we can change something. So there is a bit of an attempt here to sow defeatism.
Now, as you just pointed out, the intention is really to move public opinion. And we call them push polls because they're trying to form public opinion more than they are trying to measure it. They're not really scientific when they tell us that they got a margin of error of 4 points here and 4 points there, and yet we see them spread apart by 10 points, 12 points. It just doesn't add up. But I think a key thing is that they're not measuring the Trump movement accurately. The Trump movement is not made up of likely voters, and we see that as the footnote on all these polls. It's a poll of likely voters. Did you see that same sort of thing in Brexit?
Totally. I mean, you know, YouGov are the biggest polling company in the United Kingdom. They've been considered to be the gold standard of pollsters over the last decade and perhaps a little bit more. And they had their 1,000 tracker poll, 1,000 voters, and they were tracking all through the referendum, you know, which way they were moving. But, you know, they weren't connecting with the kind of people I was meeting on the street who'd never voted in their lives and who, if a polling company rang them up, they just put the phone down. So yes, there are two phenomena here. Firstly, there's the shy voter. So I'm not going to tell these people I'm voting Trump. They might think something bad of me. But actually, privately, I feel I am. So there's the shy voter, but there's also the non-voter. So look, I think you're quite right to be deeply skeptical about the polls. I mean, my reading of it would be this. I do think that the Bush tape, did damage Trump. And I think we have to be honest about that it did hurt him. My guess is he probably is a little bit behind, but still very much in with a chance. And I think that tonight's debate is pretty key. You see, I think that in the first debate, she had the better of him. And that's down to experience. You know, he was stepping up to a level that he'd never been at. I've been there myself. Yeah. I've done these big debates, and I know that when you're somewhat virginal going into these things, whether we can call Trump virginal perhaps is a matter of conjecture, but you know, when you're going into these things and you've never done them before, they're tough. But I felt by the end of the second debate, he completely dominated. he didn't just dominate her, he dominated the people doing the debate as well, the moderators.
He understood he was in a 3-against-1 situation.
Yeah.
And he called him out on it.
And he did. And he was right to do so. So I think psychologically, he comes to Las Vegas with the upper hand. She's going to be very nervous going into this tonight. She's going to play very safe. And I think he will go in and look for the knockout blow.
Let's talk to the voters for a second, because the whole point of these polls, as we've just been saying, is to discourage people, to get them to drop out. But when I look at what you did in England, it reminds me of William Wilberforce, the guy who ended slavery virtually single-handedly. It's what you did when you went to the European Union and you said, we're going to get Britain out of the European Union. William Wilberforce, for his entire life, took on the moneyed interests, the multinational corporations that were involved in free trade of slaves. And so he stopped that slavery. It took him an entire lifetime to do it. The final vote to outlaw slavery occurred shortly after he died. So this is a long-term movement. We can go straight to the seat of power. William Wilberforce has shown that. You showed that to us in Britain with Brexit. We can take them on directly, and we can win. It's a long-term game. They've been in it for a long term. This is a movement. This is what we see being started here in America behind Trump, and it's a movement that you started with Brexit as well.
Yes, and don't think that this is just America and Britain. This is actually happening across a lot of Europe as well, and very important that we remember that we've got people in France and Germany and Hungary and Italy and everywhere you go now. People are saying, you know, the global elite have led us very badly. The rich have got richer, the poor have got poorer. This simply isn't working. And the one thing I would say is, you know, whatever happens here on November the 8th, American politics is never going to be the same again.
That's right. Yeah.
It simply can't be, because you're right. Actually, I mean, Trump's not a Republican candidate, he's an independent.
Yeah. He's taken over the party
He-
from the establishment.
yeah.
You're the ones looking in for
I mean, you know, and everyone's run away from him.
Yeah.
He's effectively an independent. Now, if he wins, and America changes course. But if he doesn't win, if the establishment win this time, that is not the end of this story, because all those people that will have been motivated to stand up and do something, they're not going to go away. They're not going to disappear. So, yeah, I think ultimately, you know, we've toppled the establishment in the United Kingdom. It took us a very, very long time and a whole number of false starts, but we've done it. And I think that is going to happen in the USA. It's just a question of whether it's this year or whether you have to wait a bit.
There's a lot of talk about election fraud. As a matter of fact, the headline on USA Today is "No Election Fraud." And yet these same people will tell us we've got to be very, very concerned about the Russians taking over our elections, to the point that they want the federal government to seize control of running our elections. The real problem here is electronic voting, because the Russians or anybody can take over the machines, right? It can be done by a corrupt party organization. Do you have this problem in the UK, or do you have more of a paper-based trail that is auditable?
Ours is more of a paper-based system. However, ours has been very debased by a man called Tony Blair. For those that don't know him, he's like the British Clinton, really. You know, he was around at the same time and thought the same. What Blair did was a massive extension of postal voting. Now, so the way that happens is, you know, the postie delivers your vote, and it comes through your door, and, you know, 10 minutes later, a nice big fella working for one of the trade unions says, "Oh, hello, Mrs. Smith, good morning. I've come to collect your vote." "Oh, you haven't filled it in yet?" "Oh, well, I can help you with that." And that is happening hugely across the United Kingdom. We've also seen within some of our religious minorities just fraud on a third world scale. So now that we've got Britain out of the EU, one of my next big campaigns is to abolish what we call postal voting and what you call pre-voting, I think. I think it should be abolished. There aren't many things we can learn from France, but the French insist that to vote in a French election, you physically have to turn up in person on the day, collect a numbered ballot paper, put your cross on it, and put it in a box.
Well, we know that too. We did
you know,
that when we had elections in Iraq. Had it on one day.
Yep.
Everybody showed up. They got their finger painted purple.
Yes.
And they couldn't vote again. It was that simple.
Well, it can be done.
Yes.
So I think there are lots of arguments about modern living, about technology. Frankly, I wouldn't trust any of them. And I think getting rid of pre-voting, getting rid of postal voting, making election day real is something that we should all be campaigning for.
One final question. As you said earlier, this is a global movement. And one of the things that the globalists have done is to tell people that they need to think globally, act locally. I think we need to understand globalism and we need to act locally. And as you pointed out, this is not just a problem for the UK or for Britain. It's something that all countries are being forced to look at. But we need to understand what the approach is, right? We need to understand that they're going to erase the borders, they're going to seize control of the economy, and then they're going to shut us down in the name of climate change. That's what they want to say we should think about locally.
I mean, some of the climate change stuff is just mad. I mean, here we are effectively wrecking our manufacturing industries when we know that India and China are not going to do any of it. It doesn't matter what they say in the Paris Accords, they ain't going to do it. So we are effectively inflicting, wounds on ourselves with this. So yes, that obviously needs rethinking. But I think economically, I think the absolute key to all of this is, the Goldman Sachs is, in the case of Europe, the Siemens Engineering in Germany. They love the EU model, and they love that model on a Hillary's sort of scale, a hemispheric scale. Why? Because it's through these new forms of supranational government where the giant multinationals get to write their own rules. The giant multinationals effectively own the political process, and they put in place a series of regulations and a series of barriers to small and medium-sized businesses that means the big boys effectively can carve up the market relatively uncontested. That is not, Bernie Sanders.
Give us an example.
Well, Bernie Sanders calls that capitalism. Yeah. We are not living in capitalism. We are living in an age of global corporatism. It is an entirely different thing. And what I want to see a situation, and certainly Ronnie Reagan in this country would have been advocating this if he was alive today. I want to see a situation where actually we remove those barriers, we remove excessive legislation that we place on small and medium-sized businesses. The pharmaceutical industry perhaps is one of the best examples in Europe of a rule book that's being created where it's virtually impossible for any small entrepreneur to come into the market and get themselves established. So it's carved up by a few big companies, and you know what? Because of that, the consumer effectively pays more. Healthcare becomes more expensive because we've allowed the giant firms to take them. And that's one little example for you. So I think
they create the regulations to keep their competition out. They saw off the bottom rungs.
Absolutely, and it's happening across a whole range of industries. And I think, and we've seen a little bit of it. Once or twice, Trump has mentioned some of this stuff. But I think we need to sort of start getting the ghosts of Thatcher and Reagan going on the small man and small woman who want to take risk, set up their own little businesses, and who ultimately create real wealth within the economy and create real jobs. And that is the opportunity that we now have. We voted for Brexit. Yeah, sure, it's going to take us 2 or 3 years to sort it all out. But we've now got a chance to move back towards a genuine capitalist system where people have got a chance of succeeding. And that, I think, didn't you guys used to call this the American dream?
That's right. And we used to call it a Declaration of Independence. We said we're going to take back our freedom, our property, and our self-governance from a small globalist cabal.
I would just finish by saying that whatever happens tonight in this big showdown in Vegas, there's a couple of weeks of full campaigning left, and what the Trump campaign need to do is to try and get a national conversation going on the very things you and I have just talked about for the last 3 minutes.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
fellow Info Warriors, I am very excited to be able to announce to you the introduction at InfoWarsLife.com of a new way to save time and money when you stock up on InfoWars Life formulations like Survival Shield X2 and Super Male Vitality. Just go to InfoWarsLife.com today, select your favorite product, click on Auto Ship before adding to cart, and choose how often you want us to send you another order. Every time you choose Auto Ship at InfoWarsLife.com, you get 10% off, and you won't have to worry about running out and having to reorder next time. And of course, you can cancel with one click anytime. As you know, I'm all about the idea of a 360 win, and the new auto ship feature at InfoWarsLife.com is a sure win for everybody. A win for liberty, a win for health, and a win when it comes to big savings. Visit InfoWarsLife.com today and save 10% on your next InfoWars Life order by selecting auto ship at checkout. That's InfoWarsLife.com or call 888-253-3139.